don't know if you've heard, but a non-recurring, totally unrelated anomaly happened in Las Vegas last night. Apparently, and I don't know when this has ever occurred before, some white guy decided that he was going to start mowing people down. Now, I don't know what you would call it, but whatever you call it, don't call it terrorism. In fact, I'm not even sure we could call it mass murder. We just call it a terrible day. See, the white media's been in overdrive trying to figure out how to plaster this one over. They know exactly what the hell this is. The worst mass shooting in U.S. history. And yet, they're whitewashing it. Now, what does that tell you? See, this is white supremacy on the march. I told you and keep telling you that survival is not at the top of their totem pole of values, and this should spell it out for you. And don't give me any garbage about how, oh, well, this is not the time to be politicizing it. The right wing's been politicizing this issue all day, and they always do. And don't give me any garbage about how this means something. You shouldn't be sitting here doing anything other than showing sympathy for the victims. Give me a break. I'd like to know, where was the concern for the victims when they were in Charleston? What we heard about was a judge saying that the real victims was the family of Dylann Roof. Of course, the judge never mentioned who victimized them. And don't tell me that you're concerned about the people who were killed, because if you were concerned, then you'd want to do something about the problem. You didn't want to do anything when it was a bell tower in Texas. You didn't want to do anything when it was a Luby's restaurant. You didn't want to do anything when it was Timothy McVeigh or Columbine or Jonesboro or Sandy Hook or any of the other massacres and slaughters that white males keep carrying out. The problem happens to be that there is a highly permissive social environment for white people, white males in particular, to do whatever the hell they want. They're never criticized, they're never checked, they're never investigated, and they're never stopped. So what happens is you wind up with a situation where this is just the ugly price of freedom. Did you know that Bill O'Racist actually said that? I'm not making that up, by the way. Bill O'Racist actually said that. He said, quote, "Once again, the big downside of American freedom is on gruesome display." Now, you know, when there are shootings in Chicago, nobody says, well, this is just the downside of American freedom. What they say instead is, these niggers somebody needs to get these niggers under control. Donald Trump was to send in the National Guard. Tell me something. Has Chicago ever had 60 people gunned down in a single night? Or a single week, for that matter? Where's Bill O'Reilly at to go ahead and do the body count now? Let's do a count and comparison now. Where's Ben Shapiro at now? You want to lecture us about violence in Chicago some more? Tell us about how black people need to learn not to be shooting at each other some more? No, the problem happens to be that we don't have any news services who are willing to keep tabs on the pale males and how white people are gunning each other down. And that's deliberate. The white media happens to be the propaganda arm of white supremacy, and you can see that most clearly with how they've handled this latest slaughter. Deadliest shooting in U.S. history, but the whitewash is on. They're not talking about this mass murderer in pejorative terms. They talk about the killing, but they don't talk about the killer. See, with Micah Johnson, they didn't even wait until the bodies were cold before they were already heaping the pejoratives on him. They wanted to make sure you knew everything there was to know about him. And make sure that whoever it was negative. The man was a veteran. The man had never been in trouble with the law, but they don't act like, oh, what a mystery. Instead, it's Black Lives Matters, radical guns down the police. Facebook had, he just hated the cops, hated white people. Yeah, they made sure to leap all over that. This guy, on the other hand, mums the word. I mean, it took hours and hours before they were willing to put his face out there. That's the first clue he was white, as I called it. The headlines don't demonize this Paddock character. They don't disparage him. This guy just killed at least 60 people and wounded hundreds more, but they treat him like he was innocent. This is white supremacy. This is the mind control that they use the media for. A black child can be murdered by the police, and, well, this child, he had behavioral problems. They make it seem as if the police were under threat somehow. Meanwhile, you got this guy who carries out the worst mass murder in American history, and, well, we need to ask what went wrong in his life. They get out the sad violins for you. No one is casting any aspersions on him. They're getting on code. Where are the white people at to cast aspersions on him? Where are the articles saying we're going to run this guy into the ground because we don't want anyone thinking the way he did was all right? Instead, it's exactly the opposite. No one's trying to dirty him up. And this is how we keep getting this over and over again. White males understand, as I keep telling you, they understand the value of when you condemn them, but they also understand the tacit support you give them when you refuse to condemn them. To this day, Timothy McVeigh is not a terrorist. It's very rare to find any white person, certainly in the white media, who will call Timothy McVeigh a terrorist. They talk about the Oklahoma City bombing as an isolated incident. But it's not terrorism. That's because so much of the behavior that we see the dominant society carrying out is wholesale violence, and it's ideological violence. Dylann Roof did not just show up at Mother Emanuel Church because it was a Wednesday night and he had nowhere to go. He showed up there and said he planned it out, and said he did it for a reason. And the reason was he was trying to intimidate black people, and he was doing it specifically for the purpose of forwarding white supremacy. Now that is the garden variety textbook definition of terrorism. Ah, but he ain't no terrorist. You're not going to prosecute him under terrorism. Because if you prosecute him, there's a whole lot of white folk who would wind up having to get those indictment papers. This is a war to them. You didn't believe me when I told you that they care about hurting black people more than they care about their own lives? Do you believe it now? They have a choice. They can either crack down on the pale males who carry out this violence, or they can decide that it's more important that the white males have access to their substitute phallic symbol, their equalizer, as Dr. Francis Cress Welsing educated us about. To them, that's what the gun is. The gun is the white man's equalizer. And it doesn't matter if it's this Paddock lunatic, if it's Dylann Roof, or if it's Bill Maher, or if it's Antonin Scalia, may he rest in hell, or Donald Trump. They all look at the gun as being their equalizer. They're never going to crack down on it, especially not for white males. Because that's how they intend to keep black people in line. They know damn well that it ain't going to be done by hand, so that's what the guns are for. Guns have a special place to them because guns to them mean this is how I'm going to control black people. And with my fellow whites to rubber stamp the murder and to make sure that we all code up when it comes time for trial, I'll never go to prison, so we've got de facto immunity from law because white people understand. There is the unspoken and just as often spoken understanding. You don't prosecute a white person for killing black people. So now you have the white media that understands fully how these kind of incidents reflect on white people, white males in specific, as a whole, so they have to protect this guy. I mean, after all, who do you see running the newsrooms? Other white males. Not that they needed any prompting to do so. Nobody is asking who this guy's been talking to. They're not putting together any list. They never do. With Micah Johnson, they want to know who he talked to, what web pages did he went to, who was he talking to online, who were his friends, did he have any associates? Gavin Long, they were sitting here trying to go after Dr. Boyce Watkins. They were any nigger who was talking to this guy, we got to go ahead and get him. Yeah, because that's war. All different rules apply, though, when the shooter is white. Dylann Roof admitted that he was talking to people online, and he said the problem was these guys wanted to talk, and I wanted to act. Nobody asked who is it he's talking to online. He was clearly part of a virtual terrorist cell, but nobody asks. Instead, they tell you he had black friends. According to some of his white pals, he had black friends. Yes, the fix is in. The question is, now we got to ask, what was this guy's motivation? We need to ask some serious questions about that. Today you had this hoax going on that apparently that Islamic State was taking credit for this mass murder, and now it turns out that apparently that was not the case. Now, officially, the whole lie about Islamic State being behind this started with the Associated Press. But you know what? It's not exactly like the Associated Press needed a whole lot of help in order to disseminate this crap. I would be one to ask, what is the background of this shooter? Perhaps there's something in his background that we ought to know, because it's no accident that places like 4chan and Reddit were among the first ones trolling this issue and deciding that they were going to try to push the line that this guy has some sort of connection to radical Islam. And this might seem a bit in the weeds here, but it's not a stretch to ask, why is it that 4chan has significant ties with the police? The police talk to 4chan and their users a lot. They're always bragging about how they've got friends in police departments who tell them derogatory things about the black victims of police violence to spread online. Can you get this out there? Can you get this in front of people? The 4chan terrorists who attacked Black Lives Matters in Minneapolis, they bragged about online how they had friends in the sheriff's department, the police department. And after they got arrested for their attempted act of mass murder, the white media actually had some interviews with some of the 4chan terrorists' white friends in law enforcement. A couple of sheriff's deputies. Turned out that they were telling the truth. They actually did have people who they knew in law enforcement. And these guys brag about how, in the case of Philando Castile, they were getting fed information by the police department to spread rumors that Philando Castile looked like a guy involved in an armed robbery, even though the police who pulled him over were not looking for any armed anything. So the guys on 4chan and Reddit, they have extensive ties with law enforcement. They're connected with them, and law enforcement talks to these guys all the time. And the reason that I bring that up is I'm not sure how much of a coincidence it is that it's the clowns from 4chan who were spreading this whole Islamic State meme, when you consider the fact that 4chan probably heard something from law enforcement. Something that perhaps made them nervous in light of what happened in Charlottesville last month, or a month before last, rather. Perhaps the police told them something about this Paddock character that made the white supremacists who infest 4chan, the vermin who fester there. Maybe they looked and said, we might want to get out in front of this, or at least get some sort of counter-narrative going ahead of time, some sort of preemptive counter-narrative. That way, if somebody says that this guy might have been a white supremacist, perhaps, then people will look and say, well, we already had a hoax about him being with Islamic State, are you sure that's on the level? That's probably what's going on here. I would imagine it's not far-fetched to ask the question. Because the white media and the white authorities, white law enforcement, the enforcement arm of white supremacy, they're not saying much about this guy. See, with Gavin Long, they didn't wait to put at all. They didn't say we got to get all the facts. They didn't say we're conducting an investigation. Police officers have been killed. We don't know what happened. They put information out minute by minute. The shooter here is dead, just like Micah Johnson was, just like Gavin Long, and yet for some strange reason, they're making it where every little thing about him is a state secret. Now, if you doubted that the white media is in league with the white supremacists, you ought to ask how quickly this whole Islamic State crap started off on these hate websites' comment sections and then migrated to the so-called mainstream media almost immediately. The question is not how did 4chan, a known white supremacist sewer, spread this garbage. The real question is, why did the media even listen to them? Because that's what happened here. You'd be surprised how many of the stories that you see online the white media picks up from places like 4chan and Reddit. They take their cues and their information from the online racists. There's a reason that you see the white supremacists focusing so hard on trying to push their particular line of garbage in cyberspace. That's where they disseminate their lies. And what happens is the white media will try to cover themselves by saying, why, we didn't say that this happened, we said that people were talking about it online. The white supremacist in 4chan, Dylan Roof, talking about black on white crime statistics, he wasn't following Bill O'Reilly's lead. Bill O'Reilly was following the lead of the online racists. Like when you saw President Tangerine mindlessly retweeting white supremacist memes about black on white crime stats on his Twitter feed. Remember that one? The media and white politicians are auxiliaries of the white supremacist propaganda efforts. What has happened in Las Vegas is a tragedy, but no more of a tragedy than what you see the police doing every year when they kill about 10 times as many people. And yet, for some strange reason, we're not breaking out the sad violins for that. I guess it matters who the shooter is now, don't it? It certainly matters who the victims are. No, we're not going to let this turn into some sort of distraction. The issue here is, how do we stop these white males from going on these continual shooting sprees? Because it's, no matter what the white media says, and they're trying to whitewash this guy and say, well, he seems to have a squeaky clean past. That's what they said about Michael Slager, too. His service record is squeaky clean. They always say that about white shooters. It's always the whole, either he was squeaky clean or he was never known to be in much trouble. That's what they said about Dylan Roof, and then we found out the guy had multiple run-ins with the law. It's just a matter of nobody ever bothers to arrest them. I did an entire video series, White on White Crime, where I keep pointing out that every time you hear about some heinous act being committed by a white criminal, almost on cue, you can predictably find that they have a rap sheet or they've had numerous run-ins with the law, a record of criminal behavior long as your arm. But the problem is they keep getting a slap on the wrist. They commit some heinous crime, and the police give them some lowball charge, or the DA knocks it down, or the judge throws it out. There's a whole series of pitfalls, trapdoors, and escape hatches that are there for white people when they break the law, until they do something so heinous, so over the top, because that's what happens when you let people get away with doing crimes. They become emboldened. As far as they're concerned, heck, they're never going to do anything to me anyway. Might as well go ahead and really act a fool. And this is going to be no different. The guy's father, about the only thing the white media will say is, well, his father was a bank robber, and he escaped from prison, and he was on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted. By the way, I'm not making that up. His father really was on the FBI's Most Wanted list. Notorious bank robber. Violent criminal. See, when Freddie Gray was murdered, they decided to smear him by going after his mother, even though she had nothing to do with anything. And Freddie Gray was the victim, an innocent man who was murdered by the Baltimore thugs. But this guy, on the other hand, well, they talk about his father as some sort of interesting detail. But not related, mind you. Well, that's kind of like with Freddie Gray now, wasn't it? Yeah, the white media does not care about loss of life. Stop fooling yourself on that. The white media's job is not to report the news, it is to control the society. They are the primary means of social control. They limit what it is that you're allowed to hear, and they put the right spin on it, too. They tell you what subjects to think about, but more importantly, they tell you what to think of the subjects of the day. Now, this killing has one thing and one thing only we should be focusing on. When in the world are we going to be able to put enough pressure on the powers that be so that white males can finally be exactly what they're supposed to be, which is the targets of law enforcement, because law enforcement keeps giving them a pass and giving them a pass and giving them a pass. There is no way in hell if this Paddock character, if his name was Mohammed, you damn well better believe that every goddamn Muslim from sea to shining sea would be under suspicion right now. Donald Trump did not slap any sort of embargoes on any European countries or places where white people come from, even though you have a ton of illegals who come from those places, and a lot of those white folks who come to the United States commit violent acts when they get here. But we ain't worried about that. We could talk about the self-destructive contradiction of how the very people who fear that there's white genocide are in fact wiping themselves out. Most of the victims of this gunman's rampage are sure to be white. But that's not going to... Donald Trump's not going to be retweeting any sort of post about, hey, white on white crime is the main reason white people are dying. He's not going to post that. White people are the main ones who make crystal meth, which has now become one of the leading causes of death for white people, but no one's going to call that white on white crime or ask, why are white people putting poison in their own communities? See, the reason this has happened is because there is an iron, rigid, immovable, but truth be told, also sacrosanct tradition of white privilege, and that privilege begins with immunity from the law. Every white person learns from the cradle that the rules don't apply to them. Now, some of them are content merely to be garden variety racists and to shoot their mouths off or get into the occasional fist fight because they know that nothing's going to be done to them. Every charge gets lowballed, so you're never going to catch a felony. You're white, so that won't be allowed to happen. But there are some, like the Paddock family, who decide that maybe they're going to take it to the limit. Dad decided that his immunity from law was so good, he was like, well, hell, I might as well rob some banks. I mean, it ain't like you're going to do anything about it. Oh, they put me in jail. Well, I'll just escape because it's all a game. Like father, like son. Is it too early to imply that there might be a genetic component to all of this white criminality? Did you think that I was being harsh when I said that somebody needs to do some serious studying? Let's go ahead and dig Charles Murray out of mothballs. He's always good for a laugh. And B.S. Ben Shapiro, we can ask him, why don't you guys investigate white-on-white crime? The genetic component of white criminality. We know that a lot of other things are inherent in the genes. Criminality surely must be among them. Heather McDonald, while she's out there pimping her fiction book, The War on Cops, or as I like to call it, The War That Never Was, perhaps she should go ahead and give us some facts and figures about white genetic criminality. But you see, all these white folk happen to be mouthpieces for these white supremacist think tanks. So of course they're never going to be telling the truth. But you have a clear-cut case here of white genetic criminality. But no one's going to look at it. Not going to be any studies done, no books put out there. Nobody's going to say that we should go from campus to campus preaching the gospel of the reason we have all of these killings, all of these mass shootings by white males is because it's in the genes. It's in their blood. This is how they are. You can't change it. So society needs to take preventative measures to protect itself. No one is going to be asking, why is it that the white privilege that they receive never gets punished? The judges never get punished for bestowing that white privilege. DAs never get punished for upholding it. The police never get punished for looking the other way. But then again, how do you expect the inmates to clean up the asylum? There's a lot more that could be said about this, plenty more, but truth of the matter happens to be, I don't want to hear that I should be concerned about the victims. Nobody's concerned about the victims. If you were concerned about the victims, you'd be cracking down on the root problem. The root problem happens to be the pale males in specific are never told that they're wrong, they're never punished for what they do, and this emboldens them until they go on and commit some horrifying act like this. You want to stop the next mass shooting? Then punish the next white criminal who breaks the law. Hold them accountable. Stop them early. That's how you deal with this. But of course, we can't really turn this into a subject that's going to be on the front burner of public discourse because the white media's already got their templates in place, and template number one is, under no circumstances do we impugn the integrity, the decency, or the wholesomeness of white people. White people are never to be typified. You are never to generalize them as having any sort of criminal behavior. You do not generalize white people as being prone to any sort of criminal behavior. White people are never crime prone. You see, whenever black people commit a crime, especially black men, question is, what about the family? What about the family? What kind of home do you grow up in, huh? He didn't have a father in the home. This clown, we already know about his daddy. But his daddy issues ain't going to become a subject, now are they? Because, of course, what you look and see is with most of these mass shooters, these white guys who decide to act like white guys, their fathers were in the home. The fathers were in their lives. They did have a male figure in the home. And look what they went and did. No, we're not ready to have an honest discussion. Well, I should say that the dominant society is not ready to have an honest discussion about their criminality. What they really want is to focus on distractions. Let's focus on Chicago. Well, I can't think of any black person in Chicago who decided to shoot 60 other folk and wound hundreds others. I can't think of any who did that. Nor in Detroit. Can't think of any there either. But no one's going to mention that. Though I did notice that some of these idiots have been talking about the police. Obviously with the police on the hot seat, with the enforcement arm of white supremacy on the hot seat because of the NFL, some idiots actually were going, well, those police were so brave. Those police were so brave. Oh, for God's sake, they got bulletproof vests and assault rifles. As much as they like to shoot at people, as bold as they've been with shooting at people, I expect them to run into gunfire because, after all, they've proven to everybody that apparently they got balls of steel. So, since the police are just these superhuman individuals of rare decency and courage, fine then. You go ahead and you do this. I am not going to lionize the police for what they did, okay? That's their job. You don't sit there and heap extraordinary praise on people merely for doing what you pay them for. I mean, if these guys had the nerve to use a bomb robot against Micah Johnson, then you think I'm going to be sitting here giving them a pat on the back because they took down some senior citizen with an assault rifle? I don't think so. So that's pretty much what I have to say about this issue. The hypocrisy is on full display and will be, because when something of this nature happens, you got to cover it up. So don't expect the white media to come up the middle. Don't expect any town halls talking about white criminality. Don't expect any white folk in the white media, left or right. Certainly not the right, but the left won't talk about it. No one's going to ask why it is that white males in particular are so prone to this kind of behavior. Because when you start to ask the question, then you got to ask, why is it that we're not doing anything about this clear social danger? It's not terrorism, and apparently it's not a crime either. It's just a tragedy. As they give you the whitewash and they talk about this mass murder in the most sympathetic of tones, that is pure evil. When you use sympathetic language to describe mass murders, when the shooter is white, we always got to ask, gee, wonder why he did it. That programs people that when the shooter is white, well, this is an aberration. Doesn't matter that it happens practically on a daily basis. Doesn't matter that every mass killing you can think about is some white guy. We have to treat this as some sort of anomaly. This is just a tragic confluence of events, just a freak occurrence. Yeah, that keeps happening on a regular basis. Meanwhile, if you got a black person who's the victim of a white person shooting, well, he wasn't a good person, you know. Well, we found that this person was in trouble with the law. Okay, you don't have any examples of him being in trouble with the law. Well, in school, there was some trouble in school. And if you can't find anything, like with Freddie Gray, well, you know, his mother had some. Yeah, we start looking at his extended family. Dirty him up somehow. So no, if the white media is not very concerned about getting serious about dealing with these gun crimes, and if you have the so-called white leaders, the political class, the misleadership class, if they're not concerned about finding out why this happens, or rather, they already know why, but if they're not serious about dealing with it, which they're not, because how many of them would wind up in leg irons? As long as they're not being serious about it, as long as they keep using these incidents as political footballs in the game of white power politics, then I'm not going to pretend as if this is going to be a subject that we're actually looking for a solution to. You're not looking for a solution. You're just looking for the headlines to die down. You're looking for it to go away. That way we can pave the way for the next mass killing, for the next example of white privilege, because that's what it means. Power is not merely defined in terms of going beyond what is the norm. Power is defined in terms of violating all norms. When you can do acts of pure evil and get away with it, that's power. Power is largely defined by how you can abuse it. It is not merely enough to rob a bank. You got to do something that so shocks the sensibilities of the public, and then you sit there in court and they tell everybody that, well, he looks like your family members, don't he? Yeah, that's because we don't want anyone taking up a concerted effort to actually punish white people when they commit crimes and break the law, because how many of them have all sorts of stories to them? They love to laugh about it. Oh, you know, when I was young, I did this. And as black folks, we look and go, God dang, I'd be doing 5 to 10 for some of the stuff that you did. I'd be looking at 20 to life for some of that stuff. Aaron Sorkin, the creator of NBC's The West Wing, that dude smoked crack and got caught doing so. He didn't spend a day in jail, by the way. See, that is the totality of the law under white supremacy. The law was not created to punish them, it was created to punish you. You want to know how it is that this guy got his hands on an automatic rifle and a whole arsenal of weapons? Because that's white culture. And white culture is not merely preserved, it is revered. They look the other way. How much you want to bet? Like with Dylan Roof was already, should never have been able to get the weapons that he got. FBI said, oh, well, I guess we just dropped the ball on this one. Yeah, there's a whole lot of that going on. Before it's all over, we'll find out that this guy could have easily been stopped if law enforcement had actually treated him the way that they treat black people. If they had treated this guy like what he was, which is a criminal, if law enforcement actually bothered to enforce the law against white people, and hold them to account, then I'm willing to bet we'll find that there were a dozen ways that this could have been avoided. But this is not about loss of life. 60 white people dead. Well, I shouldn't say 60 white people because some of them were black. We've seen photos of them. But we're probably going to find that a plurality of them were white. There was a country music concert that this happened at. But that's not going to matter. What you are seeing the white media doing right now is not reporting at all. What it is PR work. The pale males have given themselves a black eye in the media right now, and well, we got to go ahead and do some image crafting for them. We got to go ahead and do some repairs on their image. We got to make sure to prop back up and spackle the gaps in the immaculate image of white male morality. After all, we need to make sure people understand that the white males are the good guys. Even when they do wrong, they're still the good guys. Even when they do crimes unique to them, they're still the good guys. No, this is the perfect time to point out that only white males tend to run around doing this. They're the ones most prone to this behavior. You have the white media just losing their minds because one black man who clearly had more freaking mental issues than a sanitarium went to a church and killed someone. That was tragic. That was wrong. But for God's sake, why in the world are they not just flipping out over this? Because they understand that the same white privilege that this Stephen Paddock character depends upon, the same white privilege that allowed him to stockpile a small arsenal, that allowed for him to be able to have automatic weapons, and no doubt slip through several checks of law enforcement that should have been able to catch him a long while ago. And I'm predicting the future on this one because it ain't predicting the future, it's just telling the past. This is how it always works out. We always find out that there were at least a dozen ways that this latest white killer could have been caught. But the same loopholes in immunity from law that Stephen Paddock has depended upon his entire life are the same ones that the white people reporting on him, or rather refusing to report on him in the media, depend on. The same loopholes and the same privilege that the white politicians who refuse to enact hard laws against these guys depend upon. The same loopholes that white law enforcement who refuse to enforce the law against these guys depend on. It's a mutual protection racket. That's what white privilege is. That's what white supremacy is. And when Bill O'Reilly says that this is just the downside of freedom, I told you a long time ago that what white people call freedom, black people understand to be their power. So what he was saying was, one of the big downsides of our power is on display. See, when you're immune from the law, every once in a while you'll take some pot shots at some of your in-laws and some of your neighbors. Well, for them, that's just the cost of doing business. And what is the business? Maintaining white supremacy, starting with their immunity from law, because the laws were not meant to punish them, they were meant to punish you. The laws were not meant to control white behavior, quite the opposite. For them, freedom means their behavior is never controlled. No one ever tells them that they're wrong. Nobody ever stops them. Nobody ever punishes them. The laws were meant to control you. And to them, there's probably, in the back of their minds, in a place that they'll never admit, they probably get a kinky thrill out of the idea that, well, this is part of being white. Being white is you do get to, when you've just had enough, or you know, people don't kiss your behind as much as you think they should, or they don't smooch your butt as hard as you think they should. Well, you can just flip out, and that's part of being white, too. Part of being white is you just get to lose it, and, oh, I'm going to kill everybody. Everybody better watch out, because you're white, and what that means is when things don't go your way, well, you just might slaughter everybody, and you'll be allowed to do it, because the law is not going to check you. The law is not going to rein you in. That's what we see happening here. There's lots more that could be added, but for the most part it would all be redundant and it's all pointless. Unless you are going to put an end to white privilege and start punishing white people for their behavior before they go on their kill spree, then all you're doing is simply biding your time until the next white male decides that he's going to engage in the next slaughter. And the reasons, the given reasons that the white media provides, totally fake and hollow most of the time, their reasons are meaningless. Okay, old boy says that people didn't respect him. Hell, black men put up with disrespect all the time, all day, every day. Well, apparently he broke up with his girlfriend. Ain't that what Aaron Rodgers was doing, or whatever that clown's name was? Elliot Rodgers? Wasn't that what Elliot Rodgers was talking about? Oh, the women didn't respect me, and they're always running off with these black dudes. Well, maybe because the females know a real man when they see one. The society is held hostage to white people's insecurities and dysfunctions and phobias and hang-ups and screw-ups. And we constantly have a situation where any gathering, public or private, no matter if it's at a concert or a church, can immediately be turned into a slaughterhouse because the pale males decide that they're just going to vent. We know that it's wrong, but we also know that we live in a world that is in the grip of white supremacy. And black folks, you better take this seriously. You better be trying to find every way that you can to rein them in, no matter how minor. You better be fighting them with whatever you got, because that could easily be used. Next time some white guy decides that things aren't going his way, or he decides that he needs to show people who's boss. You know, with most of these mass killers, they take their own lives. Did you notice that Dylan Roof didn't do that? Most of these mass killers, they take their own lives, but Dylan Roof didn't. You want to know why? He fully expected to get away with it. He fully expected that his fellow white jurors were not about to convict him, and they weren't. There were jurors who didn't want to convict him. But Dylan Roof did such a wonderful job of saying, you know what, I wouldn't be happy unless you guys put me in prison. That's the only reason he's in jail. He threw away every possible defense that he had. But those white people, they weren't really looking to convict him. They wanted to let him go. That's why Dylan Roof didn't kill himself. He fully expected that he was going to be released. But then again, there's good reason for that. He knows that when something of this nature happens, white people as a group for hundreds of years have automatically organized themselves. We're going to back whoever the killer of the black people is. A white killer of black people? Well, this guy's not going to prison. We're just going to go ahead and say that we just couldn't convict. So understand that. That's what happens under white supremacy. You better not take this lightly. You better not take this lightly at all, because their idea of freedom means that they get to kill you. And that is never to be taken lightly.